The incredibly long history of the crazy entitled aunt, plus update. Original post. This gives the history of me and crazy aunt. It's stupidly long, so I understand if no one wants to slog through it. Crazy aunt hated me because I am the living, breathing persona of what she always wanted but never could be. That's it in a nutshell. To be fair, she also hated my brothers, but not as much. She hates my oldest brother because he's a clone of her father. They look like twins born 30 years apart. My younger brother she hated because he's 6'3", Nordic-looking blonde, Hitler's idea of the perfect Aryan, and didn't take her crap but did it in a dismissive manner, as though she was a fly he was swatting away. For years I actually thought my sister-in-law was my sister. How was I supposed to know? There was a girl about the age of my brothers living in the house and calling her parents mom and dad. Crazy aunt hated her because not only would she not take any crap, but she would shove it down your throat until you choked on it. I should probably point out that my brothers are 18 and 20 years older than I am. The oldest one married at 18 and went into the military. His wife stayed with us often to get her university education. The key here is that she hates anyone who dares to challenge her. My mother was one of 7 children, not unusual back in the pre-birth control days, and was 3 years older than the crazy aunt. Good uncle is 2 years younger than the crazy aunt, and by the time I entered the picture, the siblings had either moved away and largely written the crazy aunt off and out of their lives. The shortest version of this goes back to when CA was a very little girl and had this image of herself and what she had become. She also thought that she should have been named Emily. Yeah, that gave everyone pause when she tacked the name on to her newborn daughter. I understand CA was born in the 1930s. She still expected to be tall, thin, blonde, and brilliant. She would have fit in well with Hitler. Instead, she was short, 4'11", had dark hair, and it was quite beautiful. My mom and older aunt had it as well. A tendency to gain weight in the middle, and was just average in intelligence. She also lacked the ambition necessary to accomplish the lofty goals she had in mind. But then it was just supposed to happen, and she wasn't supposed to have actually had to work for it. When she didn't study for a test and received a bad grade, she threw a fit because she was always supposed to get top marks without doing anything for them. She was practicing manifesting abundance, decades before The Secret. The smartest person in the world who lacks ambition will not do as well as an average person with a lot of ambition. She never learned that. She had what we in this sub would call typical entitled kid syndrome, but there was nothing external feeding it. No one gave in to her demands, and she still got worse over time. She had this idea in her head of how things were supposed to be, but the rest of the world wasn't cooperating. She was so impossible to live with that her first husband, Emily's biological father, finally had to leave. No one in her family blamed him at all. Luckily, she met a docile man that made Emily a great father. That poor sucker married her mostly, I think, to help Emily. At one point in the 1970s, Crazy Aunt went back to school and tried to become, wait for it, a psychologist. She didn't make it into the grad school program and instead became a MSW, Master's in Social Work. Let that sink in for a minute. Emily is precisely 11 months older than I am. She is also the first girl born in our generation. All of my mother's other siblings had boys, lots and lots of boys. Then Emily. For 11 glorious months, Crazy Aunt had done something none of them had done and had a girl. Then I took that title away from her. I also had the temerity to be born 6 weeks early and with double pneumonia. Back then, either of those things should have killed me. Having both required a miracle, and we got it. My mother had an outstanding doctor who managed to save us both. CA was busy planning the epic first birthday for Emily. What was everyone in the family doing when they should be talking about Emily and her party? They were talking about me and my mother, checking with each other to see if anyone had heard anything. At one point, CA called my father and told him that, in her expert opinion, she's a social worker, it would be better to let it die because you already have 2 children and you don't want to be burdened with a sick and mentally retarded baby. My father informed her that they had 3 children and then quit taking her calls. She quit calling because he would pick up, hear her voice, then hang up. My brother and sister-in-law, married to my other brother who was in the military, did the same thing. For you young people, back in the day, you often had to pay for each call you made from your landline, and those calls were recorded each month on your bill. Local calls were charged at a different rate than long distance. Long distance was anything outside of your zone. Many places also charged a per-minute fee as well. A common television trope was Dad screaming about the phone bill. The Brady Bunch even put in a payphone in one episode. This was a big deal, trust me. There was only one bizarre lasting impact on me from my birth, a heightened sensitivity to sweets. For that reason, I don't generally like things with sugar. This plays in later. The other lasting impact, not really an issue, was a propensity to develop asthma if I were to one day take up smoking. So I didn't. CA rarely visited because she was a 2-pack-a-day smoker and no one was allowed to smoke in our home. It really wouldn't have been an issue no more than I would be exposed, but it kept her away, so we went with it. I saw the crazy aunt only sporadically during my early childhood, mostly at family gatherings when we were in the United States. The thing that I remember most about them is never being left alone. No matter when I looked up, my father, brothers, mother, or sister-in-laws were there. They never left me alone because the first visit that we had that I can remember, she freaked out on my brother. He describes the way that she looked at me and then at Emily as though she needed to peel off my skin and switch it with Emily. Most of her comments revolved around how I was too thin, too pale, and too short. She was always trying to get me to eat candy. I never would, not just because I didn't like it, but because my brother told me never to eat or drink anything that she gave me. She said I was spoiled. When discussing this sub with Lewis yesterday, he told me that he had nightmares for years where he showed up for a visit and was wearing my skin. Oh yeah, she creeped him out. Due to my father's job, we moved nations quite a bit. One of those took us to Japan when I was 4. I was bored at home, so my mother let me start school early. By the time we left 4 years later, I was ready for the American equivalent of junior high school, 7th and 8th grades. In Japan, they wanted students to be their academic peers and ignored the ages. It was not unusual to find a mix of ages in the classrooms, something not practiced much in the United States. While I was in Japan being skipped grades, CA was in her town not taking Emily to kindergarten. Back then, it was generally for a half a day, and it interfered with her day to cut it up like that. Her plan was just to start Emily in the 1st grade the following year. The problem was that when she went to register Emily, they wouldn't take her based on her age alone. She had to be tested into the basics. She failed, so they put her in kindergarten. CA was furious at their stupidity because Emily was brilliant. The fault here was not with Emily or her intelligence. It had to do with her never having been exposed to necessary material. She couldn't even sing the alphabet song or tie her shoes. She was just supposed to know these things, somehow. Well, CA couldn't be bothered, so stepdaddy worked with her and took over the school duties. She did great then, but was a year behind her age peers. They had a gifted program that started in 3rd grade. CA insisted Emily be put into it. The school said no because it was more than she could handle. CA threw such a fit that the school caved. Emily failed and had to repeat the 3rd grade. She was humiliated and, due to her mother's antics, became withdrawn. She never wanted to do anything because she was afraid of her mother getting involved. She always considered me safe because I already knew about her mother and liked her anyway. In a normal family, none of this would matter. Hell, it didn't matter to my family. It did matter to CA. Partly it was because she didn't get her way. Part of it was because in our absence, she had launched a one-woman propaganda machine to promote Emily and claim that the real reason my parents had left the country was because of my mental defects. By this time, the only people in the family that spoke to her were more than a death notification, were 2 elderly great aunts who thought CA was a hoot, my mother and their younger brother. Everyone in the family knew what she was like, so really it didn't matter. But it did, so much so that no one ever mentioned me and academics ever. It was best for everyone if she believed that Emily was the smartest kid ever. The next time we saw her, I was 12. CA went on and on about how gifted Emily was and how she was the top student and so popular, blah, blah, blah. It sounded like a press release. Emily just smiled and nodded. When she finished with that, she broke into her litany of how short and thin and pale I was. She told my parents that, in her expert opinion, did I mention that she's a social worker? I exhibited all the signs of anorexia and bulimia. They were getting traction in the news at the time. I never had either, never saw the point. We all just smiled and nodded. It was a short visit. One of the great aunts had died, so we went for the funeral. CA had a habit of showing up for a visit. She wouldn't call, she would just appear at the house and stay a few days. This was one of the big reasons her siblings moved and didn't give her the address. She was the kind of person who would wake up in the morning, be bored, and just decide to drive across the country to visit someone. One day, she decided to visit us. She had a plan. My parents were diagnosed with different forms of cancer 3 weeks apart. The prognosis was grim, maybe a year. I was 15. I was in my junior year at the local university. I took a ton of CLEP tests to avoid the first 2 years of generals, but I was still legally a minor. My parents had me emancipated, bought me a car, and paid off the house. I would have enough money to support myself until I was legally able to support myself. No matter how smart you are or how many degrees you get, child labor laws still apply. Besides, I had a serious truancy problem. Technically, I wasn't in school. Universities didn't count, so I needed the legal protections that emancipation would give me until I was old enough to drop out of high school. I actually still had to do that, a bizarre story for another time. The younger of my 2 brothers, Lewis, was divorced and had custody of his girls. They lived close to us. I was set to be okay as a 15-year-old can be when faced with the prospect of losing both of her parents within the next few months. Financially, I was fine. Logistically, I was fine. Emotionally, I was a wreck, desperately trying to hold it together. I remember the day so well because it was a miserable day all around. It was mid-August. By 7 a.m., it was 90 degrees. It was extremely humid. I had gone to register for my fall classes and pick up my books. Anyone who attended a major university in the late 80s and early 90s probably remembers the nightmare that was the registration and book buying. It was hours of waiting in lines, only to be told that classes were full or canceled, spending hundreds on a single textbook that you would probably never use and certainly would never be able to sell. Add to that the problems with traffic and parking. I was not in a good mood when I got home and carted all that crap into my room. I was hot, sweaty, and tired. I wanted a shower, some food, and the air conditioning set to a popsicle. I took a quick shower and redressed. When I opened my bathroom door, my young niece was sitting there looking irritated. She was 5 and irritation was unusual for her. Mostly it involved her 3-year-old sister. Me, hey Nikki, what did Annie do? Nikki, nothing. Me, then why do you look irritated? Nikki, Grammy wants you in the kitchen. There are strange people there. I don't like the lady. Me, why not? Nikki, I don't know, I just don't. Grammy doesn't either. She's using her too nice voice. Me, who is it? Nikki, she says her name is CA. Me, crap. Nikki, now you look how I feel. Can I stay in here? Me, yes. Keep your sister in here with you. If you leave, I want you and your sister to stay where I can see you. Nikki, okay. I went out and sure enough, I see Emily in the back of CA's head. CA turns and her jaw drops. Like my brothers, I waited until I was 13 to really start growing. I ended up at 5'10". Growing pains are a real thing, by the way. My father is looking highly amused. I was, and M, still thin and pale, long blonde hair, blame my father. His ancestors are from Northern Europe. Mom, how was registration? Me, about like I expected. I got everything I needed and most of what I wanted. CA, where are you registering for school today? Seems a bit early. Did Lewis take you? Me, yes, and it's not really early. I drove my car. What brings you here? CA, well, I heard about your parents and I came up with a perfect solution. You're too young to drive. Me, you discovered a cure from all forms of cancer? Awesome. I have a license. CA, no, I mean to your problem. I don't approve of young people driving. It gives them naughty ideas. Me, my problem is that my parents have cancer. Cure that and you solve my problem. I don't care what you think about driving. CA, no, I have a solution for what to do after they're gone. Don't sass me. Me, so you can't cure cancer, but you can resurrect the dead? I was going to nominate you for a Nobel. Instead, I'll call the Vatican. Don't tell me how to behave. CA, don't be flip with adults. Your mother raised you better than that. Dad, I helped. CA, that explains it. Dad, thank you. Me, so what is your grand plan? CA, you will of course come and live with us. Me, you have got to be kidding me. CA, I'm not. You can go to school with Emily. You will probably not be in classes as advanced, but I'm sure you will do fine. Me, no. CA, this matter has been decided and the adults will make the decision. Me, for starters, I have an older brother who I could live with if that were a problem. 2 of them, actually. I also have a house to live in and a car. I have plenty of money and I'm not going anywhere. If I were going to live with an aunt and uncle, it would be good aunt and good uncle who already made the offer. By the way, I'm legally an adult. Most importantly, your opinion on this matter doesn't count. CA, no you aren't. You are a year younger than Emily. I will sell the car. I don't believe in allowing children to drive, and I'm the adult here. Me, I was emancipated. The car is in my name, so you can't sell it. My parents are also adults, as I am. So you are not part of this. Stay out of it. CA, yes I can. I'm the adult in charge of you. Dad, we aren't dead yet. Mom, you have our answer. Me, you will never be in charge of me. You cannot control me. I'm not Emily. Nikki, if she is going to live with anyone, it would be with me. She's mine. She was always claimed ownership of me, told her sister to get her own aunt. CA, we have better schools and you'll even be able to go to name university if you get in. Me, I go to a different name now. CA, you're 15. Me, thank you for pointing out the obvious. By the way, Namehead hunted me and I turned them down. I told them that I didn't want to live that close to my crazy aunt. Now things are difficult enough for us all emotionally without your insanity. Please leave us alone. You can't have me. CA, well, if you're really attending name, what's your major? Me, psychology. I plan to be a psychiatrist. Maybe someday I can have you committed. CA, you are very rude. Me, you can go fuck yourself. That is the only time I ever used profanity in front of my parents. CA, are you going to allow her to speak to me that way? Dad, when she says something we disagree with, we will let her know. Mom, you made the offer and we appreciate your concern, but the matter has been well handled. We are confident that everything will work out just fine. They stayed for 3 days and I don't think I spoke another word to her after that. She told me that I was rude, disrespectful, and should be ashamed of myself. She demanded that I apologize. I walked away. I did apologize to my parents for my language. They raised me better than that. My brother took a day off from work to keep his kids away from her. We never left them alone with her, and he still didn't want her alone with me. I stayed where I was after my parents died, and they both lived to see me reach the age of 18. My brother took on almost a father-like role. Sometimes I even attribute things he says as coming from my father. Kind of a mental slip, if you will. The real funny thing is that he sometimes forgets and refers to me as the sister to one of his daughters, so I'm okay. You never get over losing people you love, but you go on. There is really no other choice. Emily is also great. Happily married to Mike, 2 great kids. CA is dead, but her long-suffering husband lives on with Emily and her family. We don't talk about her mother. I'm sorry this was so long, but many of you asked for the history and there really isn't a way to shorten it without the details. A glib, I'm everything she wanted to be, sounds not only conceited but doesn't really explain it. To those of you who have wondered if she really was mentally ill, the answer is most certainly yes. What qualifies as mentally ill now is not the same as back then. She was termed difficult and her behavior generally passed off as such. She was 63 when she died. There was no funeral or memorial service. She was cremated and her ashes dumped in the nearest ocean. She was deathly afraid of water and never learned to swim. Emily made that call. I think that pretty much sums up her feelings on the matter. Mostly I posted this because sometimes entitled people and parents just happen. Over time, our live and let live society has begun to breed more of them. Partly because the rest of us give in to them, it's often easier. Sometimes, just sometimes, they burst spontaneously out of the ether. Emily suffered as a result of it, and I think that is why she didn't become an entitled kid or become an entitled parent herself. There was so much pain that she didn't want to do that to her children. The real happy ending here is that the entitlement died with CA. Now for the update. Update. Entitled aunt claims adult child has to obey her because it's the law. Another post about a parent volunteering their adult child reminded me of this. It happened to my cousin, but I was clearly there for the majority of the story. I remember it so clearly for a couple of reasons, in addition to just having a good memory. It was the first trip after my father had died, and it was sadly the last trip I took with my mother. She died less than a year later. TLDR at the bottom. My aunt was always playing the big shot of solving people's problems, but using my cousin as the actual person to take on the problem, always for free. If someone insisted on paying, entitled aunt kept the money. Need a babysitter, a ride, house cleaned, yard mowed, errands run? Oh, my daughter can do it. As far as my aunt was concerned, the only reason Emily existed was to cater to her. Emily was her ultimate trophy. Entitled aunt was entitled long before it became a huge thing. Cast. EA is entitled aunt. Emily, the cousin. Mike, Emily's boyfriend. Me, ACCER. Police officer 1, police officer 2, judge. My aunt has always been entitled. It was her personality type. My mother couldn't stand her little sister, so we tried to avoid her, while still maintaining contact with her husband and child. My uncle, their brother, lived further south in the States, so we always tried to avoid EA knowing when we were visiting. On this trip, I was staying with my cousin for a couple of weeks in the summer, and we were going to do the tourist things. EA thought that the university not being a session meant that the cousin was slave labor. One day, Emily decided that enough was enough. She was supposed to run errands for a friend of EA and told her mother had plans. Her mother, as usual, acted as though Emily had agreed and expected her to comply. Emily just didn't run the errand for the friend as demanded. It was that simple. My mother and I had arrived about 10 minutes before the phone rang. EA called, and though this was back during landlines, she was screaming so loudly that both my mother and I could hear both sides clearly. EA, how dare you embarrass me with my friends? You call Mrs. No Name and apologize immediately. You are grounded for a month and you may not drive the car at all. Now you make that call and go run those errands now. If anyone can explain how she was supposed to do this without using the car, I'd like to know. Emily, Mom, I'm 22. I do not live in your house. You do not pay my bills, and you do not own my car. Run the errands yourself. I have plans. My mom was nervous, leaving us at that point. It's a mom thing, and she has met her sister thing. Even though we were both fine, she just left after Emily's boyfriend. We left and went to a water park and a few other things. We got back to the house and we were talking about where to have dinner. Mom insisted on paying for us to go someplace really nice for dinner that night. We get back and Emily's car is gone. She called and asked where it was. Emily, Mom, do you have my car? EA, yes I do. Your father brought me over so I could check and see if you had obeyed me. I told you that you were grounded and you were not there when I arrived. I'm keeping the car for a month, but I'm going to let Mrs. No Name borrow it because you have been so horrible to her. Emily, Mom, that's stealing. I want my car back now or I'm going to report it stolen. No, Mr. No Name can't drive my car. EA, I'm your mother. What I say goes, Missy. You need to learn some respect and get it through your head that I'm in charge and you are the child. You don't own anything. It's mine because I'm your mother. The police will likely arrest you for wasting their time. Emily hangs up and looks at me. She is so angry she is crying in rage. Emily, ACCER, if I call the police, she's going to know you were here. Me, I can live with that. That fallout is a whole other story. She picks up the phone and calls the police, tells them the car has been taken without her permission and where it is. Mike drives us over there. We do not want to miss the show. Police Officer 1 knocks on the door. EA answers. EA, hello officers, do you need something? Police Officer 1, ma'am, the vehicle in the driveway matches the description and location of the vehicle reported stolen. EA, it's my car. I took it from my daughter because she is grounded from using it for being disobedient and disrespectful. Police Officer 2, I see. May we have a word with her, please? EA looking very smug. She doesn't live here. Police Officer 1, who had noticed us across the street. You three, come over here, please. Police Officer 1, did one of you call us? Emily, I did. It's my car, officer. My mother seems to think that she has control over it and me. EA, it's my car. I'm your mother and you have to obey me. It's the law. Tell her, officers. Police Officer 2, actually, ma'am, there is no such law. Your daughter is an adult. EA, there most certainly is such a law. I'm going to report you to your chief for not knowing it. I may even sue. Police Officer 1 to cousin, may I see the car registration and your license, please? Emily hands them to him. Police Officer 1, ma'am, this car is registered in the name of your daughter and only to your daughter. It's her car and you have no right to drive it. EA looks at the registration the officer is showing her and then snatches Emily's license from him and slams the door. The police officers look at each other for a moment and then shrug and ring the bell again. EA answers it looking very smug. Police Officer 1, ma'am, I'm going to need you to return the license now. EA hands him the license that she has cut into several pieces. EA, now she can't drive because she doesn't have a license. She looks at Emily as though she just scored some odd victory, then she finally notices me. EA, ACCR, what are you doing here? Me, just trying to have a nice visit with my cousin. She has hated me for years. EA, you need to leave. I didn't give you permission to visit. Where is your mother? Me, I don't need your permission. My mother is not here. I can travel without her. Police Officer 1, ma'am, you're under arrest for destruction of government property. Apparently cutting up a valid license is a felony in some places. Who knew? And grand theft of this car. EA, you can't arrest me. I'm her mother. I have rights. Police Officer 2, yes you do. He then reads them to her. The officer explains to us that until she destroyed the license, he had been willing to issue an appearance ticket. Then instead of being arrested, she would just have had to appear in front of the judge and get a fine. This was a much bigger deal. Emily ran into the house to tell her father what had happened. We all chatted for a little bit until the phone rang. It was EA telling him to call their attorney. We left. I drove the car back to Emily's and took her to get her license replaced the next morning. The attorney called my uncle, apparently, and didn't know my aunt, and he showed up at the first hearing a week later to try and get it dismissed. It looked to be going her way at first. EA attorney, Your Honor, this is a family matter. It simply is a case of a mother disciplining her child and the child calling the police because her mother grounded her from using the car. Judge, so she got mad and called the police and she, not knowing that it was a crime to destroy the license, did so. EA attorney, yes, Your Honor, that's pretty much it. Judge, prosecutor, do you have nothing better to do today? Prosecutor, no, Your Honor, I don't. I consider it rather important when a 22-year-old woman has her car stolen, it doesn't matter who stole it. She has just as much of a right to justice as someone who has their car stolen by a stranger. Judge, 22, the victim is 22. Prosecutor, yes, Your Honor. The victim is a 22-year-old woman who is the sole owner of the vehicle in question. Her mother became enraged at her daughter. She then went to her daughter's home, stole the car, and later destroyed her license. EA attorney, Your Honor, I was not aware of the age or living situation of the victim. I was under the impression that the child was a minor who resides with her parents. EA was sitting there looking smug. Her attorney was sweating bullets. Judge, EA, do you realize that these are very serious charges and if convicted, you could face up to 8 years in prison? EA, for what? I have the right to discipline my child as I see fit. She disobeyed me. She will think twice before doing it again. Judge, no you don't. You have the right to discipline your child within the confines of the law. You have stepped outside of that parameter. You stole your daughter's car. EA, I'm her mother. It's my right. It isn't really theft because she is my child and her property belongs to me by law. Judge, where did you get your law degree? EA, I don't have one. Judge, then let me be the first to explain to you that your child is a legal adult, period. You have no right to anything of hers without her express consent, period. You may not take her car without her permission, period. You may not enter her home without her permission, period. Do you understand that? EA, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm her mother. That gives me the right. I'm in charge. Judge, no ma'am, I'm in charge. This case will be held over for trial. I went home a week later. EA eventually took a plea deal where she had 2 years of probation and had to take parenting classes. The parenting classes were Mike's idea, and the prosecutor thought it was great. We laughed hysterically over that because my cousin is an only child, lol. Emily and Mike married a year later and moved the hell away from there. This took place about 30 years ago. EA maintained for the rest of her life that the judges, there were 5 for different status hearings, didn't know what the hell they were doing, and she was right. That's all for today. If you're enjoying this story, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you.